Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today, we'll be covering a case where a young woman working as an executive secretary went missing after turning in early from a night out with friends. An exhaustive search took place, eventually ending when a hunter by chance stumbled across her remains. With hundreds of leads to work through, police began to set their sights on the most likely of suspects, and with recent developments, inch closer to the answers needed for justice to be served. Today's case is about the murder of Lisa McBride. "27-year-old Lisa McBride left her job as an executive secretary at Lakeland State Bank on the afternoon of June 22, 1990, to head up to New York City to attend a country concert. At the time, Lisa was living in Vernon, New Jersey, and owned a home on Glen Road in the Highland Lakes neighborhood. The drive from her home, where she lived alone with her two cats, to the Beacon Theater was about an hour and 10 minutes away. She was going to see Clint Black perform with three of her friends. After the concert had ended, Lisa and her friends drove back to New Jersey and went to a place known as Big John's Pub, which seemed to be a place Lisa frequented relatively often. Lisa, being the social butterfly, chatted with friends while at the bar. Her friends and family described her as a super friendly person, one that had a zest for life and loved to make people laugh. A family member told The Record, quote, "It was hard to get a decent picture of her because she was always making faces or doing something to make us laugh. She was fun to be with," end quote. Now, the following morning, Lisa had to work. She took her job as an executive secretary to the vice president at the bank very seriously, and it's been reported that for at least the past 3 years, she hadn't missed one single day of work. So, sometime around 1:15 or 1:30 a.m., after Lisa had had only about 3 beers at the bar, she decided to head home to get enough sleep to wake up to get to work on time the following morning. She told her friends that the reason she was leaving was because she had to work in the morning. She hopped into her car and made the roughly 15-minute drive home alone. It's reported that she arrived to her Glen Road home sometime between 1:45 and 2 a.m., and a neighbor saw her get there, get out of her car, walk to the door, and step into her house. And from what I understand, nothing seemed off at all. Until the next morning, on June 23, 1990, when Lisa didn't show up for work, which, as we already know, is completely unlike her. The girl hadn't even taken a sick day in 3 years. And you'd have to think she'd only drank like 3 beers at the bar the night before, so she probably wasn't hungover and risking being late for work. Something had to be up. So around 7:30 a.m., her coworkers tried to get in contact with her, calling her home several times before the worry was just too much and they decided to call her family. Lisa's parents, George and Norma, were made aware of their daughter's strange absence from work, as was her brother, Douglas. In several articles on this case, it was stated that her family headed over to her house to check on things after they were alerted, but I can't quite tell if that meant her parents or her brother or both. There were a few articles that described the scenario and went on to explain what her brother saw when he got to her house. It's reported that he arrived sometime around 10 o'clock that morning, and when he pulled up to the house, he saw that Lisa's car was still in the driveway and nothing seemed amiss to him. It's been reported that there were no signs of forced entry, and from what I can tell, the doors were locked. When Douglas walked up to the front door, he double-checked on the key Lisa had hidden outside, and he found that it was still in its normal spot. And from what I've gathered, I believe he used this key to let himself in, assuming his knocks on the door went unanswered. Once he was inside, Douglas was unable to find his sister, and it appeared as though she wasn't home. Her purse and keys were nowhere to be found, though, which is already a little odd considering her car was still sitting in the driveway, and we know that she had driven herself home the night before, not like she'd left her car at the bar or somebody drove her home or something like that. But either way, it's reported that as Douglas checked the house for any sign of his sister, he noticed a few things that seemed a little bit off, but nothing overly concerning right off the bat. The New Jersey Herald reported the following from Douglas. Quote, "The light on her bedroom dresser was on. There were no sheets or blankets on her bed. The living room couch was pulled away from the wall about 6 inches, and the kitchen light was on," end quote. However, upon further inspection of the premises, it was discovered that the phone lines to the house were cut from the outside, along with 2 cuts on one of her windows. So at this point, the McBride family called authorities to report Lisa missing.
Besides all the things that they found outside, like the phone line being cut and the window being cut open, the stuff inside was already concerning. Like, no sheets on the bed, the couch moved further away, lights left on. It just seems like these things are out of place.
Yeah, it definitely seems a little bit weird. I think the no sheets or blankets on the bed is like what stands out to me the most. I think the light being on her dresser in the kitchen, like that could have just been an accident. She came home the night before, left it on. I mean, how many times have we accidentally left lights on downstairs when we go up to bed? Yeah, so that's not overly concerning to me. It's the bed and then the couch.
Yeah, the bed and the couch are the two that stood out to me too. The bed, obviously, because she would have slept there. Unless she had left in the morning and she had thrown them in the washing machine or dryer or something like that before she left.
Yeah, that's possible, but her car's still there. So then that kind of...
Well, I'm thinking somebody could have picked her up. If you're thinking outside of that, if her keys and her purse are gone, but her car's still there, then maybe somebody had picked her up and she went with somebody in the morning. Just hadn't been in contact with anybody. But the couch being moved 6 inches away from the wall, that makes me think like, was somebody looking for something? Did somebody clean up something? Stuff like that.
That makes sense. And just like last week's case, authorities took this seriously from the second they were made aware of the situation at hand. The prosecutor at the time, Richard Honig, was even involved from the very beginning. Is that weird to you, though? A prosecutor getting involved from, like, the second the investigation starts? Like, you don't even know what you have at this point.
I would need to know more about the department because whereas they're being called a prosecutor, detective lieutenants are the prosecution sometimes for police departments.
Oh, really?
Or detectives in general. There are members of the police department that are seen as the prosecution when going to court. So I would need to know.
So I don't think that's necessarily the case here because in an article in the Record, it stated that Richard had, quote, abandoned his own county offices to set up a makeshift headquarters in a trailer next to the Vernon police station, end quote.
Yeah, I don't know. I would need to know more about this guy and his ties to the potential victim, the whole
scenario. Yeah, I just thought it was a little bit strange, like right off the bat. It's like, let me drop everything. Let me get involved in this investigation. You don't know if you have a potential crime here. It was just like so immediate. He's on the case right from the start. I feel like you usually hear about a prosecutor or an AG or somebody getting involved later on down the line once someone's potentially about to be charged or once you're in a full-blown investigation. So
I agree. I think I just need to know more about the situation before I really judge it because does he have ties to somebody like the family or something? So maybe the family was concerned and he found out about it.
It doesn't seem that way, not from my research. So it's just strange.
I find it strange, but I don't think it's anything to bat an eye at.
Yeah. Nearly immediately, authorities did alert the public that they were classifying Lisa's disappearance as involuntary. And it seemed as though they were fairly certain from the moment she was reported missing that she did not choose to leave. As the investigation ramped up in the first few days since Lisa had been last seen, authorities stopped at nothing in their attempts to find her. Helicopters, search dogs, and even infrared technology were all used to search hundreds and hundreds of miles in and around the Vernon, New Jersey area, including some heavily wooded areas nearby as well. Droves of people volunteered their time in the efforts, along with thousands of flyers being printed and pasted all over the area and even in neighboring states to spread the word about Lisa's disappearance. It's reported that Honig, the prosecutor, had even put together a task force from the very start, like literally within days, that comprised of over 15 investigators assisting in what's been described as a, quote, round-the-clock search for Lisa. Hundreds of individuals had been spoken to within the first couple of weeks of this investigation in hopes that someone would have even the tiniest tidbit of information to provide to police that could assist in locating Lisa. The Daily Record reported, quote, police have interviewed more than 300 people in person and contacted several hundred others by telephone. But despite the plethora of leads, Honig does not know if we're any closer to finding McBride, end quote. And along with all of the investigative efforts, her family also put up a hefty reward of $100,000 that would be given to anyone who provided information that would lead to finding her. No expense was spared, and everyone involved in this investigation pulled out all the stops in their search for answers.
Did she live in a wealthy area?
So it seems that way. Her parents seem to have money from what I can tell. And I mean, she was an executive secretary to someone high up in a bank. Like, I think she was doing pretty well. And she was living in this Highland Lakes area, which seemed to be like a relatively nice neighborhood.
What was the name of the place in New Jersey?
Vernon, New Jersey. And her house was on Glen Road in Highland Lakes. It's like a little, I don't know, like suburban community.
I was wondering if it was a wealthy area or if she came from money or stuff like that, because for a family to put up $100,000 reward, that seems like a lot of money to just have on hand to be able to do that.
Well, I mean, you have to think if they're putting up $100,000 back in 1990, they definitely had money. I think it's more so her parents that had the money than she did, and obviously they were able to come up with that much to be able to provide us a reward that early on, so.
It doesn't look like there's easy entry and exit from her neighborhood.
It's funny that you say that because that'll come up later. So stop looking. Even with everything investigators and the family were doing to find any clues to lead them to Lisa's whereabouts or to hopefully entice someone to come forward with information with that super big reward, nothing proved to work. At this point, there were no indications as to where Lisa could have been or whether she'd been abducted or killed. There were no additional witnesses coming forward stating that they'd seen Lisa the night she disappeared, outside of the neighbor who saw her get home around 2 a.m., and no valuable information gathered from any of the almost 800 leads police had worked so far.
800 leads?
800 leads, yes.
I could see like 800 interviews, but 800 leads? That sounds a little bloated.
This was a very heavily publicized case. There was a lot in the local papers. There were a lot of people working on it. Like I said, hundreds of people were volunteering to search. All of these investigators were round the clock searching for her. I mean, it was a big deal.
I get it. But 800 leads.
Well, you would assume. I mean, maybe it's just tips that come in and each one is considered a different lead, maybe?
I guess. But that seems, like I said, bloated.
Maybe it's bloated for the media. Who knows? But
I don't know. 800 leads. Think about that.
It's a lot, yeah.
So just on what people have told them,
yes,
this case could go in 800 different directions.
You would consider that? Like you wouldn't consider each tip that comes in, even if they're the same?
Me personally?
Yeah.
If I get 10 people that said the same thing,
yeah,
I would say that's one lead.
Okay. Maybe it was just one of those things where it's like they got that many tips that came in, like that many callers.
I guess.
And maybe it got misconstrued in the media to say like, oh, it's leads that we've worked.
Maybe I just think of it the wrong way. I don't know. I could be wrong. I just think that if 10 people give me 10 different things, I think that's 10 different leads to work. Because if 10 people tell you the same thing, are you working 10 different leads?
No, I totally understand what you're saying. I'm not sure then like if it was just reported differently or whatever, but
yeah, it's not something to get hung up on. That just caught my attention.
Yeah. And before we move forward, I do just want to say that authorities did also look into those 3 individuals I mentioned earlier that Lisa had gone to that concert and the bar with the night she went missing. But based on my sources, the 3 friends were ruled out pretty quickly, and their names have never been reported publicly.
Do we know if they were male or female?
Yes, it was actually 2 men and 1 woman.
Okay. Was it a double date?
That I'm not entirely sure of. That would be a good question to ask because at the time, I have seen it mentioned like everywhere that she wasn't in like a steady relationship. I don't know if she was casually dating or if she wasn't seeing anybody at all.
Well, it seems like she wouldn't have been dating anybody relatively seriously because there's been no mention that her family reached out to a significant other or anything, so.
No, exactly. And we know she lived alone, so. Now, just a month after Lisa had vanished, Richard Honig told The Record, quote, "We don't have a suspect at this point, but it may turn out that we probably have already interviewed the guilty person or persons and don't know it yet," end quote.
I just have something to say about this Honig guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you've kind of planted the seed of suspicion in my head that why is he involved so early?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's nothing wrong with this guy, but now that you're telling me that, you know, he's putting out these press releases and stuff like that, where he said, oh, we've probably already interviewed the person that's involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's just something weird to say, I think.
Yeah, so I think maybe as I was reading through all of these articles, he was just in all of them. And he had so much to say, but also not really anything to say. Like it's...
And he wasn't a spokesperson for the police?
Maybe. That I'm not entirely sure of. They just said like prosecutor Richard Honig in all of these articles, so.
And there's nothing you found that he was tied to the police in any way?
Well, I mean, he's a prosecutor. Of course he's tied to the police.
I mean, like the department. He doesn't work for the police?
So it says in his obituary, actually, from 1984 to 1991, he was appointed as the first full-time prosecutor in Sussex County.
So at this time, he was the prosecutor for that county?
Yeah, but I don't know if he had any ties. It's weird.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like he was like a town or city solicitor where you would present charges that you wanted to go forward with, and then that's essentially like the town or city's lawyer that would try the case.
Yeah, it's just, again, like you were saying, isn't that just weird to say these like ominous things and then be really involved from the start? Like, what kind of prosecutor drops everything and just sets up a trailer outside the police department? That makes me think maybe he did have some ties to the family that maybe nobody knew.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I think it's strange unless things like this normally didn't happen in the area, and this was like a real big thing because you did say it was a highly publicized case. So maybe he wanted to be involved in it from the beginning. That way, if it were to ever end up turning into something and being solved and stuff like that, maybe he could use that as like a way to get forward in his career later on.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, we don't know any of that for sure, but it's definitely a possibility. So, like I said before, there was a ton of media attention on this case, and obviously most of that being on the McBride family. And Lisa's parents had been pretty open with reporters, and they discussed how the investigation was going from the start. They mentioned how forthcoming and transparent authorities were with them during the investigation, with them speaking numerous times a day and keeping them apprised of every single thing that was going on in terms of what they were doing to find their daughter. As of August of 1990, roughly 2 months now after Lisa went missing, authorities still had nothing. It was reported that even though investigators didn't know where Lisa was or what happened to her, there was someone police were incredibly hard up on finding and speaking to, either in hopes that they could get additional information from this person, or just based on what comes out about this individual, the potential that they may have been involved in Lisa's disappearance. You see, sometime before Lisa went missing, she'd been approached by a man who very clearly, at least based on what's been reported and how I've interpreted that information, had an obsession with her. This guy continuously asked Lisa out on dates, even though she seemed to be completely uninterested in any sort of romantic relationship with him. Not only did he bother her with his constant asks for dates, but it's been reported he'd even shown up at her job, left flowers on her car, and at one point even showed up to Big John's pub while she was out with friends. And no, if you're wondering, it doesn't appear as though he went to the pub the night Lisa went missing, but we do know this was a common hangout spot of hers, so he probably knew that he could show up there and find her, to ask her out for like the 400th time. But even months before Lisa had disappeared, her friends were concerned about this guy's persistence. Unfortunately, though, none of Lisa's friends or coworkers knew this guy's name, or who he even was for that matter, or really anything about him, so authorities were unable to locate him to be able to question him.
It's strange that they would feel so negatively towards this guy and know nothing about him. How did he even find Lisa?
Yeah, I don't know how he met her. I don't know why he became so obsessed. I don't know how he found out where she worked. Was he just a crazy stalker and followed her around? Or had they been friendly before? And maybe he got a little too interested and she was like, no, I'm not really into you like that. So I don't know exactly what the background on him is, as there hasn't been like much reported on him at all.
So police didn't find him?
They have not found him, no.
Interesting.
Also, by this same time, around August of 1990, the McBrides had gathered even more money to provide as a reward for information in Lisa's case. The reward had now been increased to $150,000. The McBrides were really struggling at this point and just desperately wanted answers and to know what had happened to their daughter, regardless of the outcome. George McBride, Lisa's father, had previously told The Record, quote, "We desperately want her back with us, or at least find out what happened. The not knowing is our real agony, pure agony," end quote.
Like we say with a lot of families, I think that's always the hardest part.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we've talked about it before where, at least for me, I think the not knowing would be the harder thing. I don't know if I would be able to, I guess, have that hope every day, but also have the horrible thoughts come into your mind to say, you don't know where they are. You don't know what happened. Did they leave? Are they, being held somewhere, or are they dead somewhere and you don't know? All of that just, I would prefer, as hard as it would be to handle the worst case scenario, I'd rather know it.
Yeah, I think the unknown is a double-edged sword. Because I understand where a lot of people are like, oh, I just want to know. I just want to know. And even in some of the cases that we've done recently, they're saying, we don't even want to prosecute. We just want to know what happened and we just want to bring our loved one home. But I know personally, I might say that, but then once I know what happened, my whole opinion on everything might change.
I completely agree with that because In the moment, you're just saying, I want them back. I miss my mom, my daughter, my sister, my brother, my uncle, whoever it is. And then you find out, say, whoever did it came forward and they said, I did this, 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 and this. Here's her remains. At that point, I would be like, fuck you. You're going to jail. I can't believe you did such a horrible thing.
Right. I want retribution.
Yeah, it must be so hard. I truly feel for families like that.
I'm torn on, is unknown worse or is knowing worse? I'm unsure if not knowing and then finding out is worse than finding out immediately.
Or just never knowing for the entirety of the rest of your existence.
Right. So it's like, what's worse? Knowing right away? Not knowing forever? Not knowing and finding out?
Ugh, it's just awful in any which way you look at it.
Right, because, like I said, your opinion on things change when you have more information.
Now, 4 months into the investigation, Lisa's family asked for assistance from an organization that Lisa had been a part of, the NRA. You see, Lisa was an active member of the NRA, and she was actually also a competitive shooter. After the McBrides had asked for the organization's assistance, they jumped right on it and did all they could to help the McBride family. It's reported that they even blasted out information about Lisa's case in their newsletter, which was distributed nationally. In this newsletter, they asked all of their members across the country to keep their eyes peeled and to alert authorities of any information they might have in Lisa's missing persons case. The New Jersey State Association of the NRA had even planned a search alongside the Coalition of New Jersey Sportsmen in a place known as Wawayanda State Park, which was a huge, almost 35,000-acre state park in Hewitt, New Jersey, which was only about a 12-minute drive from Lisa's home in Vernon. Hundreds of people who were a part of the two organizations, as well as additional volunteers, planned to take some time to search the vast state park on Sunday, October 21st, 1990. However, just the day before this search of this state park was planned to take place, around 9:30 a.m. on October 20th, 1990, a man hunting near the Delaware River, which is right along the New Jersey-Pennsylvania state line, found nude, badly decomposed remains in what's been described as a very remote and thickly wooded area off of Old Mine Road alongside the Delaware River in New Jersey. Authorities were able to identify the remains the same day they were discovered and used dental records to confirm that they were, in fact, Lisa McBride's remains. The location where Lisa's body was found was over 30 miles away from her home, which converts to roughly an hour and 10-minute drive. In an article with The Record, it's reported that there seemed to be some miscommunication and frustration between the prosecutor and authorities, along with these volunteers from the NRA and the Coalition of New Jersey Sportsmen that had previously scheduled this search at the state park on Sunday. Obviously, we know that Lisa's remains had been found the day prior, but it took nearly the entire day to be able to identify them as belonging to her. So, because of this, it wasn't announced publicly that she'd been found, and all the volunteers had gotten together to do this search the following day. In an article with The Record released 2 days after Lisa's remains were found, the lack of communication was reported on. The article stated, quote, "The prosecutor withheld news of Saturday's discovery until early Sunday, forcing Roger Iverson, an NRA director, and Richard Miller, coalition chairman, to call dozens of gun clubs, sporting clubs, ham radio clubs, community groups, and the Red Cross during the wee hours to cancel the search. Nevertheless, about 200 unknowing volunteers stepped out of four-wheel drives and pickup trucks on Sunday's cold morning," end quote.
I understand where the drama is, but I'm surprised that the prosecutor didn't have to report that at least a body was found. Because if you at least make mention that a body was located and that it still hasn't been determined who it belonged to or who it was.
You can suspend things, right?
Right, you can suspend the search. I mean, if that's where they were going to go search.
No, it wasn't. So that's the thing. The search was at this state park that was only 12 minutes from her home, which, I mean, it makes sense to search there. It's right nearby.
So she was found in like the tri-state area type?
Well, it's literally like right on the New Jersey-Pennsylvania line.
I got you.
So I also don't know why it's the Delaware River in two
Probably
states.
Runs down.
But it must run through Delaware, but yeah. So Lisa had been a valued and well-liked member of the NRA, and I'm sure the news of her remains being found had upset the group greatly. And there was something that I read in this article that stood out to me. There's a quote from Richard Iverson in the article, who I assume is the director of the New Jersey State Association of the NRA. He stated, quote, This case is a clear indication of why we need to explain to politicians and our illustrious governor why people need to have the means to protect themselves so they don't become a victim like Lisa, end quote.
In a utopian world where there were no guns, no weapons like firearms and bombs and all this stuff, I could see where it'd be great to not have guns.
Yes.
But as long as they're out there, gun laws only prevent law-abiding people from holding on to them. Criminals are always going to break the law, and they're always going to get whatever they want to get.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then the thing that gets me is the fact that Lisa is this competitive shooter, and she's a member of the NRA, and she's still unable to protect herself. And that makes me wonder if at the time were the gun laws more strict so that even someone like her couldn't necessarily like conceal carry or protect herself in that way, or did she have to keep it like locked up in a gun safe that maybe she couldn't have gotten to in time at home? Or I'm just wondering if maybe this NRA director is angry for this reason, and he's like, why do we have all these things in place that are going to stop this young woman from being able to protect herself from a predator?
I can understand if whatever laws in New Jersey at the time prevented her from carrying outside of her home, but it doesn't seem like this crime occurred because she was outside her home without a firearm.
Yeah.
It seems like she was attacked in her home.
What kind of laws then could even be in place, though, if she was attacked inside her home? Like, you would assume if she's a competitive shooter, she's got guns.
Yes, you would assume that. And also, if the laws are like, oh, you can't keep your firearm out on your bedside table in your house.
How's anybody going to be able to?
How's anybody ever going to know?
No.
Like, if you want to have that out there for protection, or if you want to have it in a safe nearby, readily available, or in some type of lockbox or locking mechanism, whatever, that gives you easy access to protect yourself, who's ever going to know? I think that regardless of my feelings on firearms and being able to protect yourself and all that, I think this is political posturing where, sadly, this NRA president might be trying to use this tragedy as a way to push an agenda to change laws. If she was out at a bar and as she was walking to her car, she was abducted walking to her car, yes, maybe a concealed carry permit in that state or a firearm on her person would have helped her protect herself. But if she got abducted from her house, I think that if she really wanted to, she would have had firearms readily available in order to stop the intruder. I think that if this person cut a screen and came in through a window or something like that, she probably had no idea what was happening. So a firearm might not have helped her anyway.
So what I was just about to say is, do you think that this person could have been lying in wait? If she was out until 2 o'clock in the morning and then they got in through these cuts in the window screen, however they were able to get in, then could they have been waiting and she just didn't have time to react? Or this, I think, is less likely, but could she have been like walking to her car in the morning, which kind of reminds me of Jennifer Kessie's case, like how she was walking from her apartment to her car and people think that she could have been abducted like in the in-between there. Could that have happened? And because she didn't have a gun on her, it was in her house, could she have been taken in that moment?
I don't think so. It's in her driveway. She parks in the driveway of the house. With Jennifer Kessie's case, I think it's a little bit different. It's a big parking lot, and she had to walk, from down her steps and then a few 100 feet or 100 feet or whatever to her car. I think that based on the screens being cut and the phone lines being cut, I would probably lean towards thinking that this person was lying in wait.
That's what I thought too, yeah.
That way, when she comes in, they can ambush her. Versus her being in the house, hearing them breaking in.
Yeah, exactly. Like her asleep and them trying to get in. I think it would be more along the lines of, were they watching her? Did they know that she wasn't going to be there that night? Did they see that her car wasn't in the driveway? And then that makes me just go right back to this like stalker guy.
Right. Well, if the stalker guy knew that she went to this pub regularly, he could have went by the pub, saw that she was there, knew that she was going to come back, possibly intoxicated, less likely to be able to defend herself. I'm going to break into the house. I'm going to lie in wait. And then when she came in, he could have ambushed her.
Yeah, so that's definitely possible.
If that all happened, I don't think that they broke in while she was in the house.
I don't think so either. I think that just
too much of a chance for there to be, she hears something. She's a competitive shooter. There's no way she didn't have guns.
There's no way she didn't have guns. She had to have. Like, you're not going to keep them at a locker at like the NRA location or whatever. You're going to have.
Right. As far as firearms go, generally, transportation of firearms, you can have it in your little lockbox. You have to have it locked. You have to have it separate from your person, like out of your general reach in the vehicle, and you have to have your ammunition separate when you're transporting it.
But not in your house.
I mean, when it's in your house, there's no reason to say that you couldn't just have it locked in a safe and boom, you open the safe and you have it available.
Yeah.
So just knowing that phone line cut, no chance of her calling out, screens cut, probably lying in wait, took advantage when she got into the house. And back to where we all began with this, again, I think it's, unfortunately, the NRA is trying to push their agenda. Lisa was an NRA member, she did this, she did that, she was a competitive shooter, but because of your laws, she was unable to protect herself with the firearm that she was so proficiently trained to use.
I completely agree with that. Now, at this point, Lisa's body was brought in for an autopsy, but it was mentioned to the media that it could potentially be more difficult for the medical examiner to be able to nail down her cause of death due to the level of decomposition. Her remains were pretty much skeletal, as she'd been missing for 4 months by the time her body was found.
Was she in the water?
I don't believe so, no. She was near the water, but it said that it was a very remote area. In the following weeks and months, no information regarding her autopsy findings were released to the public. However, something else of importance was stated. Apparently, investigators had found, quote, new evidence at the scene where Lisa's remains were discovered, and were working to review what had been found. It's unclear what this new evidence was that was located near her body, though.
This just made me think back because I never asked the question before. They're finding new evidence at the scene where her body was found, but what about evidence in the house?
Nothing. From what I understand, nothing about what was in the house or what wasn't in the house, other than no bed sheets and like those couple of things that her brother mentioned, have ever been reported.
So this just goes to forward our idea that whoever did this planned this out, cut the phone lines, cut the screen, got in there, did whatever they did, cleaned up.
But then you have to think, if they're taking bed sheets, why would you take bed sheets? First of all, I would think most likely a sexual assault. That would leave some sort of DNA evidence behind. I know it's 1990, still in its infancy, but still, if someone's pre-planning this to make sure that in no way, shape, or form any indication of them is left in that house, that would make sense. But then I wonder, like, I don't know her cause of death, so would there be blood? But then if there was blood, it wouldn't just be on the sheets and the blankets. It would be probably soaked into the mattress.
I think all of it's kind of a possibility because we know so little, but I think a sexual assault probably occurred in the bedroom, which is most likely why the sheets were gone, because that gets rid of blood, sweat, semen on a top level. And then if you think about the couch was moved away from the wall. So I'm wondering if there was some type of struggle there where maybe something broke.
Okay, yeah, maybe clean that up.
Whatever, clean that up. This person most likely had all night to clean up.
Yeah.
The brother said that there was nothing out of place outside of the lights on, the sheets gone, the couch moved a little bit, so...
The key was still in its spot, like all those things.
Right, so I'm assuming that whoever did this, again, to go with the planning, they did a big cleanup after the fact.
Yeah.
And then moved on to where they dumped the body.
Yeah, so this, and I just want to say, too, that this is just us assuming that there was a sexual assault, because it has not been stated that she was sexually assaulted. We know that her remains were described as nude, but that doesn't necessarily mean that her clothes could have been destroyed over those couple of months that her body was out there, or animal activity, or if she had been in the water or something like that. So you don't know for sure. You can assume, but it's never been publicly stated that for sure that happened. That's just us kind of thinking about it and the reasons why these things might have happened.
Sure, and I think that's a lot of what we do here, though, with experience I have with what I do and the experience that we've gathered looking through all these cases and everything that we've kind of researched ahead of time, just through even outside of the podcast. I think that when you have all this evidence in front of you, again, just like an investigator or something like that, you have to look at what's here and what is most likely to happen. And I think based on the evidence that we have, knowing this guy that's never been identified, now that he's in the mix and police really wanted to talk to him, you're kind of piecing that together. And even if, you know, you're not a huge true crime buff, but you've watched movies before, true crime movies, you've watched murder mysteries, things like that, these types of things are little bits and pieces that you start putting together, and it's like, okay, this makes sense. Let's move forward with this. Let's move forward with this. And that's what I consider a lead. To go back to those leads.
Yeah.
Imagine having 800 of these to go on. I don't think that, you know, if 10 people, again, to use
call
that number 10,
say,
10 people call in to say, if all of our friends say, hey, this guy, it's not all of our friends count as multiple leads, it's one lead, but.
Yeah, I see what you're saying for sure.
Not to keep harping on that, that's dumb, but I think that based on everything that we've learned so far, it's fair to deduce that this is probably what occurred. She was badly decomposed and left nude. Sure, it doesn't mean that a sexual assault occurred, but an autopsy will probably never be able to determine that because of the state of her body. Mm-hmm. So you have to keep it in the realm of possibility as something that could have occurred.
Yeah, because then you just think back to, okay, there's no sheets or blankets. So then you're taking little other clues that you see along the way to put together with the other things that you've already learned to hopefully come to some sort of conclusion. And again, because we aren't the police working on this case, we're never going to know any of this unless they release it to us. So we have to think outside the box. And the more you talk about it, the more you speculate about it, the better it is for people who might have seen something weird, like maybe some guy brought some sheets somewhere to wash. Like, I don't know, could have been anything. So just talking about it makes you think more and more about something you might have recognized to call in and say, hey, I have a lead for you, you know?
Yeah, and from like a documentation standpoint, from like the police's aspect, it's important to mark down all these things, like all these little things, like, obviously in the report, they're not going to leave out that the sheets were gone and stuff like that. But when you start thinking of an MO, and maybe it wasn't this guy that was obsessed with her that did this, maybe it was somebody that was a habitual offender and had done this multiple times. So when you start putting together, okay, an MO, the phone lines were cut, the screen, they entered through a window, the sheets were gone. Yep. Now, if you have those three aspects on one case and you start piecing together, okay, this happened in New Jersey, another one happened in Delaware, another one happened in Maryland, another one happened in New York, Pennsylvania. Yeah. When you have these little types of bits and pieces that go together, maybe it happened in another house, but the girl was found alive because she escaped, or the victim was found alive because they escaped. These little bits of information are important to document and to talk about because they can help link to other cases that maybe have been solved and somebody's in jail for it now, or maybe something very similar happened at another location in another jurisdiction, but they have a little bit more information that you don't have, and you have a little bit more information that they don't have, and then you come together and it turns into something that you can move forward with.
That's a really good point to bring up, and I'm glad you said it. Now, there were countless articles reporting on Lisa's case in the early days after her body was discovered, but still no updates on her cause of death, or even her time of death, which I think would be an important aspect to know. After the initial influx of media reports, things seemed to quiet down for a little while, but an article was released in 1995 that described a development that took place in Lisa's murder case 4 years prior to when this article was released. Around a year after Lisa had been killed, sometime in 1991, her mother finally decided she was going to begin cleaning out her daughter's home. Norma couldn't imagine having to go through all of her daughter's belongings and decide what to do with them for some time after she'd been murdered, and that's why it took her so long to accomplish the heart-wrenching task. I can only imagine how difficult that must have been, but unfortunately, it's one of those necessary things in a situation like this. But I guess leaving the house untouched for that year-long period worked out for authorities as well, because they wanted access to the house for some time, which, from what I can tell, could have potentially been the crime scene like we were talking about before.
Well, it definitely was a crime scene.
Well, yeah, I guess it is a crime scene regardless, but I guess I was thinking more along the lines of...
Where she could have been killed?
Where she could have been killed, yeah.
Okay.
I can certainly see why investigators would want to have access to that for as long as possible. We do know that things had seemed to be a bit disheveled in the house, like we talked about before, the sheets and blankets missing, and then the telephone lines and the cut window. But something that her mother mentioned in the daily record stood out to me. She stated, quote, "That was the reason to clean up the house, if I found something," end quote. And oh, did she find something.
You know what this makes me think of?
What?
You don't know what this makes me think of?
I don't know. What's it make you think of?
It doesn't make you think of anything?
I don't know. I've just been knee deep in the case. Tell me.
So think about it. Mm-hmm. A mother doesn't go through, clean the house for a year.
Sue Taraskowitz?
Yes, the diary.
Yeah, yep.
And in Sue's case, it wasn't even a potential crime scene.
No, it wasn't.
But Sue's mother, same thing. She couldn't bear to go through the room and couldn't do anything for a little while. Then when she finally, can bring herself to do it, she goes in there and finds evidence.
Yeah. Apparently, while she was cleaning out Lisa's belongings, Norma came across a piece of paper with a license plate number written down on it. At first, it was unclear who this plate number belonged to, but Norma gave this information to authorities as she felt as though it could be important.
I'm just thinking, why would you ever take down a license plate unless it was something shady, somebody following you, something to that effect where either they did something to you, caused damage to your vehicle or something like that. There has to be a bad attachment to that plate number or to whoever owns the vehicle that plate was on. because that's the only reason I would ever take down a plate.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
So I'm interested to see where this goes.
Well, remember the guy we were just talking about? The one that was borderline obsessed with Lisa? I guess one of Lisa's coworkers had taken down his plate number after he'd shown up at her job during his attempts to persuade Lisa to date him. And Lisa kept that license plate number. And now it might help further the investigation into who killed her. Authorities ran the plate number and were able to track down the man it belonged to. And you bet, it belonged to the guy that was pestering Lisa.
So you lied to me.
I did, and I did it for your own good.
I guess. Yeah, but what are the chances? Like, what are the odds of that?
Right?
Also, I'm wondering, too, like, where did the mother find this? Because that's clearly a crime scene. There's clearly some type of B&E. This girl was probably abducted from the house. Mm-hmm. You're going to tear that fucking place apart when you're investigating it to try and find any evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly where she found it. I would assume that it was probably in, like, a very inconspicuous spot, like maybe in a book. Or, you know, maybe she put it in like a cookbook or something, like some just random spot that only she would remember. And then just as you're looking through stuff, like maybe she was just flipping through a book to be like, oh, should we keep this? And then it's like, oh my God, what's this?
I picture like somewhere not as inconspicuous, maybe like in a jewelry box or in somewhere that if you're looking for stuff or whatever, you could probably find it. But I'm not knocking the investigators or, you know, the detectives that process the scene or anything like that. But I'm just thinking, you know,
they were hard up on finding this guy. Why wouldn't they look harder for something to indicate who he was?
Right, and this was like a serious investigation. Not that all of them aren't serious, but this was like a high-profile investigation for them from the beginning. Yeah. So you would assume that, you know, that place would have been torn to fucking pieces to find something.
Yeah, I don't know, but...
At least the mother found it.
Exactly. So this seemed to be the first big break in the case and a great place to be in terms of the investigation only a year in. And not only that, like we were just saying, we know that authorities had been particularly interested in this guy when Lisa first went missing, but were unable to find him to question him. But now they had him. But unfortunately, as much as everyone was hoping things might pan out and answers would be right around the corner, this guy had a pretty airtight alibi.
I was busy stalking someone else.
That was...
Is that it?
No. So when they found him, a year after Lisa had been killed, he'd been living on the other side of the country. And then, come to find out, he'd also been in the western region of the country during the exact time Lisa went missing a year prior.
Prove it to me.
It hasn't been proven publicly, but I'm assuming that if authorities ruled him out, they were like, this is a pretty airtight alibi. He was literally on the West Coast. There's no way.
Yeah, I guess.
It sucks, though, doesn't it?
It doesn't mean that everything that we said before isn't valid, though.
Well, hear me out, because this was something that I was thinking in terms of theories, and I'll bring it up now because we're talking about it. But I don't think that necessarily means that someone didn't hire somebody. If this was planned out this well, like, wouldn't someone who's going to kill somebody, like, how many times do you see a murder for hire where someone's waiting in the house for them?
No. Okay, I understand where you're going, but if we were so concentrated on this guy that was stalking her, a stalker is not going to hire somebody to kill somebody. The stalker wants to date her. He wants her probably physically. When we, or at least when I was talking about this whole plan to cut the phone lines, to cut the window, to get into the house, to lay in wait, I'm thinking like this guy is so infatuated with her. He's been turned down by her at every fucking turn that he has just reached his end, his wit's end, and he's going to lie in wait, he's going to capture her, he's going to sexually assault her, and then he's going to end up killing her. Okay. Maybe he didn't plan to kill her, but maybe it ended up turning into that and whatever, but I don't think the same person that would be doing that is going to hire somebody to kill somebody. They want to do that personally because they're the ones that are obsessed with them. It's different if somebody is mad at somebody. Okay,
so this makes me think of, and I know exactly what you're saying, so maybe I'm misconstruing it in terms of him hiring somebody. Because then it actually made me think of that, I don't know if you know this episode of Criminal Minds, but where this guy's like so obsessed with the woman and he keeps mailing her things and it just keeps escalating over time, like to finally seeing her in person and then all of this. So like it starts out almost harmless and it just escalates and escalates and escalates. And then he ends up kidnapping her and then like he's so crazy about her, like maybe he would kill her. He ends up not, spoiler alert, but it just makes me think that now, with you elaborating on that, I agree. But then it makes me like flip my thought process on it and think, okay, no, I haven't seen anything about any potential enemies that she may have had, but what if this was a hired hit in general? Not necessarily by this guy, but by someone that was mad at her for whatever reason.
Okay. Before I get into what you just said,
yeah,
as you were talking, I flip-flopped on what I had said earlier, too.
Oh, come on.
about how he wouldn't have hired somebody.
Okay.
I think if this guy that was obsessed with her had hired somebody, it would be a different type of person than what I was envisioning.
Okay.
I was envisioning an introverted person that was like, oh, really loved this girl or thought he loved this girl and really wanted her and was like, not like the puppy dog turned crazed type thing, but kind of to that effect. If I can't explain it, you kind of know what I'm thinking.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Still lived with his mother type thing. Like I'm thinking along that lines of it. But maybe if this guy was wealthy, well-to-do, got everything that he wanted, and then this girl was turning him down. Maybe she turned him down publicly and shamed him in front of people, and he knew about it.
Oh, yeah.
Then I could see, okay, maybe somebody hiring to get this girl. This guy in particular, maybe not. I mean, he's moved to the other side of the country. Who knows how long he was there? He's probably living another life. He's probably obsessed with somebody else at that point.
True. I didn't even think of that. Probably he's like, I like this lady now.
Right. And she's more tan on the West Coast,
Yeah.
So could it have been a hired hit? Maybe. We've had other cases like Jack and Geraldine McGee where it seemed like they had no enemies and nobody had any idea why this would have happened, but it was clearly, at least to me, it seemed as though it was some type of hit.
Yeah.
Same thing with her. Same thing with Lisa.
Assume.
Same thing with Lisa, though.
Yeah.
She's got no enemies. Nobody's out to get her, this, that, and the other thing. You start saying, okay, could this have happened? Sure. Could it have happened? Yes, but why? Why would somebody have hired her? Why would this have happened?
So in terms of a hired hit, I think there could be the possibility, like, if you're looking at her background, obviously police probably know a lot more. Actually, police definitely know a lot more. And you have to think of all of the things that she was involved in. So you know that she was an executive secretary to the VP at a big bank. Could there have been some scandalous things going on there? She was a part of the NRA. She was a competitive shooter. There were a bunch of different things that she did in her free time. So what if, we don't know a lot about her involvement in those groups and those activities and anything that could have gone on there. But I would assume that authorities have gone through each and every one of those, and maybe there's a reason within those groups that could have then pissed somebody off or I don't know, anything. So you would probably, as an investigator, look at each and every one of the things that she's involved in and then pull your leads in from there. But again, we don't know any of that, so.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a possibility. I mean, there are things that obviously we don't know, but also when you're talking about all these other groups that she was a part of and that police know more and things like that, I mean, she's a grown woman. She obviously had interactions in her personal life that she probably wasn't running to tell friends. She probably wasn't running to tell her parents. So she didn't have a significant other from what we gather at this point. So there are a lot of things that she could have been going through these other aspects of her life that could have had an effect or could have been connected to something here. And it seems as though police are the only ones apprised of that information at this point. But I also think, again, whereas this could be a possibility, like the hired hit or somebody asked somebody else to do this or paid somebody else to do this. I think oftentimes with the hired hit thing, you think, oh, big money. It's like, no, there are people you can pay $500 and give them a gun and they'll go do it because people are willing to do anything. But a lot of times those cheap ones are like fucked up. Like they flub it, but
true.
I don't know about you. Like when I think of hired hit, I think like big money, like here's $1 million, here's hundreds of thousands of dollars type thing.
Yeah.
Versus, paying some bum on the side of the street, hey, I'll pay you $500 to go kill somebody.
That's just, it's probably going to come right back to obviously the person that did it and then the person that hired them, because they're just gonna be like, oh shit, I need to just tell them what happened so I don't get life in prison or whatever.
If this was a hired thing, it was probably somebody a little bit more professional because they cleaned up, they did this, that, and the other thing. But I also think that it's probably more personal.
Yeah.
Again, just to go back to that, the hired hit could be a possibility. I put that on a back shelf and just leave it there, though, until you get more information to really go back to that. I wouldn't even really use a lot of brain power on it. I think because of how it seems as though whoever did this was lying in wait and they took the bed sheets and this, that, and the other thing. I think it was personal. I think they probably sexually assaulted her. and then dump the body elsewhere. If it was a hired hit, they could have just left her in the house.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But then I think that also goes back to the cause of death and not knowing that. And then also thinking about, even if we're not thinking along the lines of a hired hit, you still have to look into those activities that she was a part of, her job, all of those things. And then you could hopefully find leads there to say who could have been upset that she had a close personal relationship with that would want to do this.
Yeah.
And that's probably exactly what investigators are looking at. But again, it's 1990, if they take the bed sheets, if her body's that badly decomposed, like what do you have for DNA that you could try and match it to someone?
Yeah, a lot of interviews, a lot of talking to people, a lot of revisiting those people and talking to them again to see if everything still jives with what they said years prior. I mean, like we were talking about today, the Tara Grinstead case was solved by a non-police officer.
Yeah, someone who's just talking and bringing it up and finding things out. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's that good police work, those good investigative tools of just knowing the community.
Good investigative work.
Yeah.
Not necessarily police work.
Yeah,
good investigative work.
Yep.
Because you could be a stand-up police officer, but you might not be a great investigator.
Yeah, you might not have the personality for it or the ability to connect with people on that personal level to get things out of them that they normally wouldn't tell somebody else.
Right, or read those visual cues, those body language cues, or ask the appropriate questions to lead somebody into giving you something that they wouldn't normally give you. But this one's wild. I'm very surprised that they were able to locate the guy that was stalking her. Maybe not stalking her, at least obsessed with her.
Yeah, I think
and he's totally ruled out.
Yeah,
that's
isn't
wild.
that crazy?
Right, it's not like last week with Victor Winetti. He had no alibi, and he's clearly the guy that probably did it. This time it's like, oh, if we ever find this guy, because you were lying to me. I was like, man, if they ever come up with this guy, it's got to be this guy. It's got to be this guy. Just based on a little bit of information, and that's me coming to a premature conclusion on it.
Yep.
But to find out that they located him, and they interviewed him, and there's no possible way that he's involved, that's pretty wild. It makes me wonder, I mean, what was done here has to be an MO that has been done other places. And I'm wondering if whoever did this is somebody that has done this multiple times. And I'm not going to say the word. I'm not going to say the term.
Yes, the term. Ugh.
But I wonder.
Yeah, it's possible, for sure.
Target a single female, cut the phone lines, get into the house, get rid of any evidence. Pretty meticulous from my perspective. Yeah,
well, we're about to find out a little more, so let's keep going.
Wow, we went on a rant.
A little bit. Now, fast forward 13 years to 2003. The investigation into Lisa McBride's murder seemed to be getting pushed to the back burner. The task force that had been established in the very beginning had been disbanded, from what I can tell, for a while now, and Lisa's case was starting to go cold. At this point, there was still no information released by authorities in terms of Lisa's cause or time of death, but I did find in an article or two that when information had come out about her death certificate, there was no cause of death listed other than, quote, external violence. And in 2003, in this article with the Record, it was stated that this choice was intentional by police. It seems as though they were using it as an investigative tactic to keep the cause and time of death close to the chest. I would assume if somebody were to come forward to say, like, okay, they know how this happened, rather than releasing it publicly.
I feel like that's just a generalized term that is or should be used most of the time when you're sure that somebody didn't die of a natural cause and that it was probably due to
external
some
violence?
Other person. Yeah, I mean, external cause of death, external violence. That's such a broad term, I feel like, that you clearly know something bad happened at the hands of another.
Yeah.
So because you can't determine exactly what it was, you put it as that. I don't know how it would...
homicidal violence?
No, I think external physical violence. External meaning it wasn't physical violence done to herself. She didn't commit suicide. She didn't do something like that. She didn't cut her wrist type thing. She didn't go and do that. So external, just not necessarily meaning external like outside of the body. External as in external from self.
Yeah,
So violence done by another person, I think.
That makes sense. So over the years, authorities would attempt to bring in FBI profilers to try and figure out who could have killed Lisa, as it seems like all the leads they'd ever gotten hadn't ever really panned out. I've never seen any sort of profile of the potential culprit released, though, but for all we know, authorities have it and aren't giving it out publicly. But without having a profile to work off of, the one thing that seems to be believed by most was the fact that whoever did this was likely local to the area. An article in the Record stated, quote, Lisa's house was among a large cluster in Highland Lakes, and the few ways in and out of that community are not easy for drivers. Also, the place where Lisa's body was found is more than 30 miles from the house and extremely isolated, end quote. Remember what you said earlier about the house?
Yes, I remember what I said earlier about the house and how it doesn't seem like it's easy access. It looks like there's really only two main roads out. It looks like Barry Drive North goes north to another area that's like another little suburban type thing. And then if you go south, you have Wawayanda Road. Wawayanda Road looks like it's the main drag that eventually leads out to like Route 515, which is Breakneck Road, and out there, and that looks like, you know, your only ins and outs.
So you probably have to come in from the southernmost location to get into the neighborhood, but if you tried to get out like north, you're getting into like another neighborhood, right?
You're only going two ways. You're going south onto Wawayanda Road, which will eventually bring you to another road, and then get you out onto a relatively main drag of 515.
Yeah.
If you go north, you're going through Barry Drive North. Barry Drive North goes and eventually crosses over into New York and brings you out to 94.
Yep.
So north might have been better because it brings you to 94.
But her body's found like southwest.
Okay. So whoever left probably took that Wawayanda Road out southwest and eventually down to wherever they, you know, escaped to.
But they'd have to know it. They'd have to know how they can get into her neighborhood without being seen, get in the house, get her out of the house, leave the neighborhood, get to where they want to hide her body. Like all of that, it makes sense that whoever did this was, even if they're not local, that they'd been around there before, that they tested out their route before, that they knew what they were going to do. So again, that brings me right back to this pre-planned thing.
Yes, I think that we are both 100% of the opinion, and I think rightfully so, that this was a pre-planned thing. Now, when you say that, yes, they had to know their way in and out, they had to do this, they had to do that, like, for people that are not at their computers that can't look readily, you come into this area, Wawayanda Road kind of comes in, and Wawayanda Road connects with Barry Drive. And essentially, if you were to continue on the main-most road, they turn into each other. And then this Glen Road is right off of that. But Glen Road is surrounded by Spruce Court, Cedar Tree Drive, Laurel Drive, Acorn Drive, Lakeshore Drive East. It's like these are all...
So this makes me think, I don't know, this just brings me back to when I first started driving and like experiencing neighborhoods and stuff. And, you know, like getting into our neighborhood is like 1-2 streets. Like that's it. But I specifically remember when I was first learning to drive and I would have to remember, you know, how do I get from school to home to whatever? I was like, oh, this seems like so much. And then as you get used to it, it's normal. But then if you would go into a friend's neighborhood, like my best friend growing up, getting into her neighborhood was like 14 frickin' turns. And there were so many side streets. And it was such like this suburban area.
Houses around.
Yeah. And you could take a turn here and like, shit, you're 3 streets wrong now. What are you doing? Like, and I would get so confused and so flustered when I'd be driving through her neighborhood because it was one of those big suburban areas.
Right.
And that's what that makes me think of is, how do you remember every single turn to get to your house that's like smack dab in the middle of like 500 freaking streets?
I know exactly what you're saying as far as getting lost and stuff like that. There's a place in the area where I work where if I were to take you and blindfold you and put you into this area in a car and say, all right, you're free to go, get out of here, you'll never fucking find your way out. It's like when I first started working there, it was like, where the hell am I? I cannot find my way out because if you take a left, it'll take you to another place. It's like, it's totally fucked.
It's
so
awful.
The only benefit to this place as far as the person finding them is that like you have these 2 main drags that are going right in and Glen Road was right off of it. But my main thing with this is like it's surrounded by a bunch of other houses. So there's no easy access to go 5 different ways to get out of the place. It's like you either got to go this way or you got to go that way.
Yeah.
And if you don't go those 2 ways, you're not getting in or out. So I agree that somebody was probably from the area.
So that makes me think too, like if someone were lost and they were having a hard time figuring out how to get out of there, someone's probably going to notice a vehicle that's like having a hard time trying to do 3-point turns, turning around, figure it all out, pulling into people's driveways, you know, that is noticed. And that's what brings me back to, even with this neighbor, seeing her at 2:00 in the morning. How did nobody see anything else? This person like just must have been so good at blending in, or I don't know. That's just so wild to me that someone could see her get home, but not see anything else.
Yeah, assuming that the person got into the house prior to Lisa getting home. That's what we're assuming.
Yeah, but you have to think after the fact, too. How did they get her out of there without being seen? If someone's up at 2 o'clock in the morning to see her just getting home, never mind someone trying to drag a body out of the house.
Yeah, that's fair. I didn't think about it that way.
Unless there's a statement that police have that's some sort of indicator of this, but they don't want to release that out and they don't have enough to do anything with it. That's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I do agree that if somebody saw her coming home, it could have just been like the stars aligned. This person was putting their dog out, or they were outside smoking a cigarette and she came home at this time and that's how they saw her.
Yeah.
But it is relatively dense, at least based on nowadays maps. It's relatively dense where if somebody saw her going in, maybe somebody would have saw her, or the person who abducted her and eventually killed her, brought her out.
Yeah, I agree. So moving forward, in this same article in the record, so now 13 years later, investigators are saying something they've said before. It stated, quote, "Chances are that we have talked to the killer somewhere along the way," end quote.
I was going to say that before you started.
Yeah, so they must be sure they know.
Right, I was going to say it brings us back to the prosecutor, Honig, where he said, we've probably already talked to the person and we just don't realize it yet.
And again, they're thinking that 13 years later. Right. So they have to know, they have to be close. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah, which I guess to me, oh, hold on. Just something that caught my eye while I was looking at this map. Still, I have it up on my computer. So Barry Lakes is the largest body of water that's next to Glen Road. But from Barry Lakes, there is a small waterway that goes out to the east, which could connect to other bodies of water. It connects to this thing called the Double Kill, which is like another small waterway. And that could have been a way to get in or out.
Yeah.
And it would connect more to the person was from the area. That's another way that they could have gotten in and out.
Yeah, that's possible for sure.
Knowing that she was found near a body of water.
Yeah.
If her house was near a body of water, that could be traversed with a boat or something like that. This person could have parked their car miles away because a car is easier to identify. If you get a plate, right? If you get a plate or a car or something like that, it's easier to give out to police and track down versus I saw a shadowy figure carrying something over their shoulder and they got into a common boat.
Or,
right? And then they left.
Yep.
So that could be another option. Just spitballing, something that caught my eye as I was looking.
Yeah, sure. So after this article was released in the record in 2003, there were really no further developments or really much at all reported in Lisa's case outside of the fact that it had been assigned to the Sussex County Cold Case Unit to be re-looked at by that particular unit. But even with the slowness in the case, the McBride family still wanted to keep Lisa's case out there. The record stated, quote, "The family, though intensely private, is as determined as ever to keep the investigation in the public eye, hoping someone will provide the tip that will identify Lisa's killer," end quote. But finally, after 19 years, just 2 months ago, in March of 2022, new information was released to the public in Lisa's case. Her body was going to be exhumed in hopes of finding DNA that could be tested nearly 32 years later. In an article with the New Jersey Herald, authorities stated, quote, "We believed there was an additional investigative step that needed to be taken, and that additional step required us to exhume the body," end quote. On top of that, authorities did something in this recent press release that John and I have preached in previous episodes. When you've reached a point where you're stuck in an investigation and it's been decades with no answers, it's time to release a little bit more. Maybe not reveal all your cards, but even giving hints to the public that could assist in bringing in additional leads and hopefully closing the case. And that's exactly what happened here. The first piece of information released is what seemed to be a tiny nugget of info that could point towards Lisa's cause of death. The New Jersey Herald released a statement regarding her injuries. Quote, "McBride's cause of death was officially undetermined, but Mueller said when she was found, she had a cheekbone fracture believed to be from blunt force trauma," end quote. We'd also discussed Lisa's time of death and its potential importance earlier, but unfortunately, that information doesn't appear to be released. I will say that there are a few comments in some articles that mention that the ME was able to identify a time frame, but again, it doesn't appear as though that's been made public. And along with that, authorities stated that there was no indication that there was more than just one person involved in what happened to Lisa.
So, I do find that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I find it peculiar that this is the piece of information that they released, that there was blunt force trauma to her face, to her cheek in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really see how that is connected to a cause of death.
Well, it's not necessarily. I'm kind of
You're thinking maybe knocked out?
Well, I'm just thinking if she's hit in some way, she could have been hit with a gun, but I'm thinking that if someone's getting physical with her, that like indicates more. They didn't say like, oh, this is her cause of death, but to me, hearing that she had been hit hard enough to fracture her cheekbone.
I think if anything, I was probably getting ahead of myself saying, I don't know how that could link to a cause of death, but if you think of those injuries sustained, how could they link to what we believe happened already, which is maybe the sexual assault?
Yeah.
If this person that was inside the house confronts her, there's some type of struggle ensues, maybe they're a larger male, they could have struck her on the cheek, they could have punched her on the cheek, they could have pistol whipped her on the cheek, which knocked her out, which everything else could have progressed from there.
Do you think that someone's going to bash someone in the face so hard that it breaks their cheekbone and then either shoot them or strangle them to death?
I think, sure, there could be further injuries, and especially injuries that police haven't revealed, because like you said, and I didn't get a chance to say this earlier, I'm happy that this police department is being forward-thinking, and they're like, hey, we're going to release a little bit more. We're going to give you a little bit more, because...
It's not a ton, but it's a hint. It's a nugget.
Right. It's a nugget, but that's great that they're doing that because you have to. Once you reach a dead end and you're not getting anywhere, you got to put out a little bit more and a little bit more. But I'm thinking more along the lines of if there's a fractured cheek or jawbone or something like that, it's probably some type of injury that knocked her out. And then her cause of death is still unknown. She could have been strangled from there because maybe, she was probably feisty. If she's, and this is totally me assuming, but if she's an NRA member and she is a competitive shooter and stuff like that, she probably has a general idea of self-defense or whatever. So if you take a random person off the street or a random female off the street, she may be able to protect herself physically better than maybe
somebody who doesn't do any of that. Well, she's a dancer too.
Right, so she's physically fit, she's strong and stuff. So you got to assume she is stronger or more capable than the average person. So maybe some type of struggle ensued and then this person ended up, punching her or hitting her with an object or something like that and knocking her out.
Yeah.
And then, the cause of death could be anything. It could be strangulation. It could be something like that.
Yeah.
Or there are further injuries that police haven't revealed. Maybe there's a skull fracture. Maybe there's this. Maybe there's that. But I don't know how much I can get from that.
Yeah, okay.
The cheek fracture.
All right.
It's more yes, but it just helps solidify my idea I don't want to speak for you, but my idea of what I think could have occurred in the house.
Well, I think it solidifies the fact that whatever happened, at least at first, happened in the house, that they didn't convince her or somehow get her out of the house quietly. Like they most likely then knocked her out and took her from the home, and that's what that's indicating more than anything.
A struggle ensued at some point, most likely in the house, which is why a couple of those things were out of place. The bed sheets, again, we think maybe the sexual assault or asexual assault occurred over there. But with the couch pulled away and stuff like that, there could have been broken glasses. There could have been other things. I mean, the family that went in there, the brother that went in there, he wouldn't have known all of the property she had. Maybe she got hit with a vase. Maybe she knocked this over, that over, and the person had cleaned up all the damaged stuff that was in there to ensure that no DNA or less evidence was left over there at the time. But yeah, I applaud the police department for releasing this additional information, but I don't know how much I personally gather from it to further any aspect of what I already believe to have most likely happened.
Okay, well, maybe not necessarily you and what you believe, but could knowing that maybe she was hit in the face, you would assume maybe if someone hits somebody else in the face that doesn't normally punch things, maybe they'd have a bruised hand or like marks on their hand or something. Could that make...
When you look at the timing of this, how are we going to know that somebody's hand was bruised?
No, what I'm saying is like, you're not releasing this information to look at somebody now 32 years later and say, was your hand bruised 32 years ago? No, like I'm thinking along the lines of you're putting it out to the public to see if it jogs any memories to say, I remember this guy, he had hurt his hand.
Had a scratch on his face.
He was going to the laundromat for some reason with these sheets. And I don't know, it was just a weird situation. Like that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Hearing you say that, I understand how this information may not be for me. It may not further my belief of what happened or help me come to some type of conclusion other than what I've already thought might be the most likely scenario. But it's like you said, it's, hey, she was struck in the face. Could it have been somebody that was punched? Did you notice this? So this is more information for people that already may know something or that were from the area or something like that could help them. It's not going to help somebody like me.
Well, you're trying to come to a conclusion on what you think took place just based on what we know. But other people, I don't know how other people consume true crime. I don't know if they're thinking of it in terms of like what happened, what was the sequence of events that took place that night into the next day and all these things. What if people are thinking more along the lines of like, oh, I lived there. Like they're just listening to true crime to listen to true crime, but then it brings them back to a time that's important.
Right. That's more clearly what I was trying to say. It's not for people like me that are listening to this, that are not from that area, that were not there at that time period to further my beliefs. It's for the people that were in that area, the people that may have seen something. It's for them to think back, hey, maybe. I remember that. I know police were looking around for this. And at this time, this guy had an injury to his hand. Things like that. I get what you're saying.
Okay, cool. Now, in terms of the DNA authorities were hoping to obtain, it appears as though they were successful. Whatever they were able to gather from her remains was sent off to Bode Technology, which, according to their website, quote, serves the law enforcement and identification markets and is unique in that it provides both state-of-the-art human DNA analysis and innovative DNA collection products. The range of Bode's services include diverse offerings such as high-throughput DNA testing services, casework analysis, missing person identification, private and CODIS data banking of convicted offenders or arrestees, as well as paternity identification, end quote. So it seems like this only just happened a little over 2 months ago. Obviously, we know DNA testing takes a while, but I mean, I would hope that in the coming months that this case could have some answers.
It seems as though there will be at least movement.
Yeah.
Positive movement.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. I wonder what they were able to gather. I wonder.
Yeah, and we know that she was skeletal too, though. That's the thing. So I just wonder about...
Well, they said there was further evidence located at the scene where her body was found. So I'm wondering if there was some type of piece of clothing or a weapon or a rope or something that was found at the scene that they tested it on.
Or her purse and her keys.
That could work too, yeah.
So you don't know what they could have had.
Or something in the house. It could be anything. It could be an oversight that whoever did this thought that they had everything planned and they weren't going to leave anything behind.
But what are you pulling from her remains? You would have to pull something from her remains that you could test against something else that you have, right?
For mostly skeletal remains, could there still be DNA on her fingernails?
Ooh, possible, yeah.
Because we were talking about how there was probably a struggle. She was probably capable of handling herself and protecting herself.
Yeah.
If the injury to her cheek is indicative of a struggle occurring, could she have scratched the assailant? And could there be DNA under the fingernails if they're still there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had talked about Teresa Corley's case, and I remember thinking, like, fingernails 38 years later, really? And they got 9 fingernails. So there absolutely could be something like that. I didn't really think of that. So whatever it is, they were able to get something. It was sent off to this Bode Technologies place. Right now, it's probably being worked on, tested. It's in line to be tested. So, I'm really curious to see if in the coming months that, some update articles come out to say whether someone was ruled out, whether, anything panned out from it. Exhuming a body is a big deal. So, I don't know. Could mean something. It could end up being nothing, but I don't know. I just have a good feeling that this one could get solved.
Yeah, I think that this is another one of those cases that we're going to have to make sure that we follow closely because with DNA being tested currently, we talk about a lot of cases that there really hasn't been a ton done or at least a lot of big information done or happening in recent times, whereas DNA was found and it was sent away 2 months ago. Like, this could just start snowballing and rolling and rolling and rolling, and this could really bring down whoever fucking did this. And if there are multiple players involved, it's just to go back if it was a hired thing, whatever. Once they get that DNA, if they get a DNA match on it, then yes, I'm very interested to see what this was and to see if something does come of this, how accurate our hypothesis may be.
Yeah. And I think
as far as what may have occurred.
Yeah. And I think we've kind of covered our theory here on what we think happened. I don't think there's any reason to continue to harp on it before we finish up here today. But, we'll keep an eye on this case and we'll put out any updates that we see on it. I've got my Google alerts on to make sure that I see anything that comes up. So we're definitely going to be paying attention to see what happens.
Yes, and I think that if our listeners don't think the same way we do, if they think something else happened, we want to hear from it, because on a lot of our recent cases that have gone up to YouTube, which, yes, at this point we don't produce video for it, but we upload everything to YouTube, we've been getting a lot of comments from people that are following particular cases that maybe it's something that happened as they were growing up as kids or whatever, but they've been, giving us more information than what we were able to find, like personal information that they remember from the times and things like that. So if you're listening on iTunes, or if you're listening on Podbean or Spotify or whatever, and you want an outlet to be able to comment on something, you can go to our YouTube channel, Wicked Deeds Podcast on YouTube, and you can leave us a comment on the audio version of the podcast that's posted up there, and we can have some dialogue back and forth on, where you think we went wrong, and you can tell us about what you think, and we can tell you where we think maybe you went wrong, and we can kind of have a dialogue, and maybe we can learn from each other and express our beliefs on what we think might have happened in some of these cases.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have that in that space too, where other people who might find this case in 6 months' time can see all the back and forth that we've had, and they can learn more just by looking at the comments compared to just listening to our episode there on YouTube. So, like John said, absolutely check it out, Wicked Deeds Podcast on YouTube.
And also, we want to know, if you go over there to listen to the audio, great. But we want to know, is video something that you guys would be interested in? Let us know, whether it be on our socials, Instagram, Twitter, or you go over to the YouTube channel just to leave a comment or talk about the case. Just let us know, because we want to know what we can do to make this even better for you.
Agreed. So if you have any information regarding who killed Lisa McBride, please contact Vernon Police at 973-827-6155 or Lieutenant Nicholas Elmo with the Sussex County Prosecutor's Office at 973-383-1194. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.